A Werewolf Shifter Romance by Lena, from Lena's Romance Library. Chapter 1. The Devil's Bargain. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Elena Vasquez pressed her forehead against the cold window of the ICU waiting room. Beyond the glass, her younger brother Miguel lay motionless, tubes and wires connecting him to machines that beeped with mechanical precision. The only proof that his heart still beat. 3 weeks. 3 weeks since the accident that had left her 22-year-old brother fighting for his life, and the medical bills were already drowning her. The experimental treatment the doctors recommended would cost more than she'd make in 5 years working double shifts at the diner. "Miss Vasquez?" A voice made her turn. Dr. Patel approached with that carefully neutral expression doctors wore when delivering bad news. "I'm afraid Miguel's condition hasn't improved. Without the surgery?" Elena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "How long?" "Perhaps a week? Maybe 2 if we're fortunate." Fortunate. The word tasted bitter in her mouth. There had been nothing fortunate about her life since their parents died in a car crash when she was 18, leaving her to raise Miguel alone. Nothing fortunate about working 3 jobs to put him through college. And certainly nothing fortunate about watching the only family she had left slip away because she couldn't afford to save him. The doctor's pager buzzed, and he excused himself with a sympathetic squeeze of her shoulder that did nothing to ease the crushing weight in her chest. Elena slumped into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, her dark hair falling like a curtain around her face. "You look like someone who's run out of options." The voice was deep, rich with an accent she couldn't quite place. Something European, maybe Russian. Elena's head snapped up to find a man standing in the doorway of the waiting room, and her breath caught in her throat. He was tall, easily 6'4", with broad shoulders that filled out his expensive black suit perfectly. His dark hair was swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. All sharp angles and hard planes, with eyes the color of winter storms. But it was the way he moved that made her pulse quicken, like a predator who'd never known what it meant to be prey. "Excuse me?" Elena's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. The stranger stepped into the room, and she caught a scent that reminded her of pine forests, and something wild she couldn't name. "Your brother, Miguel Vasquez, 22 years old, motorcycle accident 3 weeks ago. Traumatic brain injury requiring experimental surgery that costs..." He paused, tilting his head slightly. $400,000. Elena shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Who the hell are you? How do you know about my brother?" A ghost of a smile played at the corners of his mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My name is Nikolai Volkov, and I know because I make it my business to know when someone is desperate enough to consider my particular type of help. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" He took another step closer, and Elena fought the urge to back away. There was something about this man that set every instinct she had on high alert, but she couldn't afford to run. Not when Miguel was dying upstairs. "You've been researching experimental treatments online for weeks. You've applied for every loan, every grant, every charity program you could find. All denied. You've sold everything of value you own, and it's still not enough." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Even if that were true, what's it to you?" "I have a proposition for you, Miss Vasquez. One that could save your brother's life." She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. "What kind of proposition?" Nikolai reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather portfolio, setting it on the small table between them. "A contract. Marriage, to be specific." Elena's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You're insane." "Am I?" He opened the portfolio to reveal documents that looked official and expensive. 1 year of marriage to me, And in return, I'll pay for your brother's surgery and all associated medical expenses. When the year is up, we divorce. You'll receive a settlement of $2 million, and you'll never see me again." The numbers swam before Elena's eyes. It was impossible. Too good to be true. Why would you want to marry a complete stranger? Something flickered across his features, too quick for her to read. Let's just say I have my reasons. Reasons that don't concern you. This is crazy. I don't even know you. You know I can save your brother. That's all that matters, isn't it? Elena's gaze drifted toward the ceiling, toward the floor where Miguel lay unconscious. Dr. Patel had been clear. Without the surgery, her brother would die. And here was a stranger offering her exactly what she needed, wrapped in a package that felt like a deal with the devil. "What's the catch?" she asked quietly. "No catch. 1 year of your life for your brother's life. It seems like a fair trade to me." Elena's hands trembled as she reached for the contract. The pages were filled with legal terminology that made her head spin, but one number stood out clearly. $400,000 for immediate medical expenses, with an additional guarantee of ongoing care. "I need time to think." "Your brother doesn't have time." Nikolai's voice was gentle but firm. "The surgery needs to happen within the next 48 hours, or it will be too late." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. When she opened them again, Nikolai was watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "If I agree to this insanity, what exactly would you expect from me? You'll live in my home, accompany me to social functions, play the role of my devoted wife in public." His storm-gray eyes seemed to look right through her. "What happens in private is entirely up to you." There was something in the way he said it that sent a shiver down her spine. Not fear, exactly, but something else. Something that made heat pool in her stomach despite the circumstances. "Where would we live?" "I have an estate in the mountains, about 3 hours north of here. Remote, but comfortable." Of course it was remote. Men who made impossible offers to desperate women probably preferred their privacy. Elena looked down at the contract again, her vision blurring with unshed tears. Miguel's face flashed in her mind, not as he was now, pale and still, but as he'd been before the accident, laughing at something ridiculous on TV, teasing her about never dating anyone, telling her about his plans to become a veterinarian, to help animals the way she'd always helped people. She couldn't let him die. Not when she had the power to save him. "I'll need guarantees," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Legal protection. Proof that you can actually pay for this." Nikolai nodded approvingly. "Smart girl. My lawyer will be here within the hour with revised contracts and financial documentation, but I need your answer now." Elena's hand hovered over the signature line. Once she signed, there would be no going back. She'd be bound to this mysterious, dangerous man for an entire year. But Miguel would live. "Elena Vasquez," she whispered, signing her name in careful script. Nikolai's smile was sharp as winter wind. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Volkov." As his fingers brushed hers while taking the contract, Elena felt a jolt of electricity race up her arm. For just a moment, she could have sworn she saw his eyes flash with something wild and inhuman. But when she blinked, they were just gray again, beautiful and cold as a winter storm. What had she just gotten herself into? Chapter 2. Into the Wolf's Den. The private helicopter that came to collect Elena 2 days later was sleek, black, and whispered of wealth beyond her imagination. As promised, Nikolai had moved with terrifying efficiency. Miguel's surgery had been scheduled within hours of their contract signing, and the best neurosurgeon on the West Coast had been flown in to perform the procedure. Elena pressed her face to the aircraft's window, watching the city shrink below them as they climbed into the mountains. Pine forests stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by jagged peaks that scraped the belly of storm clouds. The further they flew from civilization, the more her stomach churned with a mixture of anxiety and something she refused to acknowledge as anticipation. Having second thoughts? Nikolai's voice carried easily over the helicopter's rotors. He sat across from her, perfectly at ease in his charcoal suit, looking like he commuted by private aircraft every day. Which, Elena realized, he probably did. A few hundred of them, she admitted, turning away from the window to study her new husband's face. In the 2 days since their wedding, a cold, clinical affair at the courthouse with only his lawyer as witness, she'd barely seen him. He'd appeared briefly at the hospital to check on Miguel's progress, bringing expensive flowers and speaking quietly with the doctors in a way that made them snap to attention. "Your brother is responding well to the treatment," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "Dr. Chen expects a full recovery." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by a wave of guilt. "I should be with him. He's in the best possible hands, and you have obligations now." The word obligations sent a chill down Elena's spine. She studied Nikolai's profile as he gazed out at the mountains below. In daylight, he was even more striking than she'd remembered. All sharp edges and controlled power, like a blade wrapped in silk. But there was something else, something that nagged at the edges of her consciousness. The way he moved with predatory grace. The way his nostrils flared slightly when she got too close, as if he were scenting her. The way his eyes sometimes seemed to catch light in ways that human eyes shouldn't. "What kind of business are you in?" she asked, realizing she knew almost nothing about the man she'd married. "Import and export. My family has holdings throughout Eastern Europe and North America." His answer was smooth, practiced, revealing nothing. "That's very specific," Elena said dryly. This time his smile was genuine, transforming his austere features into something dangerously attractive. "You're not going to be satisfied with vague answers, are you? Would you be, if you were in my position?" Nikolai considered this, his storm-gray eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "No," he said finally. "I suppose I wouldn't." Before she could press him further, the pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. "Mr. Volkov, we're approaching the estate." Elena looked down and gasped. Carved into a valley between two mountain peaks sat what could only be described as a fortress. The main house was built of dark stone and timber, with soaring towers and sprawling wings that seemed to grow organically from the mountainside itself. Gardens and courtyards were laid out in geometric patterns, connected by covered walkways that reminded her of medieval monasteries. The entire complex was surrounded by dense forest that stretched to the horizon in every direction. "It's enormous," she breathed. "My family has lived here for over 300 years, Nikolai said, something like pride warming his voice. "Each generation has added to it." 300 years? Elena stared at him. "Your family's been in America that long?" Something flickered across his features, too quick for her to interpret. "Time moves differently in the mountains." The helicopter set down on a stone landing pad near the main house, and Elena was surprised to see a small group of people waiting for them. They stood in perfect formation, like a receiving line, and even from a distance she could tell they moved with the same predatory grace as Nikolai. "Your staff?" she asked as he helped her down from the aircraft. "My family," he corrected, and Elena felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. The group approached as the helicopter's rotors wound down. Elena counted 8 people, 4 men, 4 women, all tall, all beautiful in that sharp-edged way that seemed to run in Nikolai's bloodline. Their eyes tracked her every movement with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Everyone," Nikolai said, his hand settling possessively on the small of Elena's back. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Elena." A woman with silver hair and amber eyes stepped forward. Despite looking no older than 40, there was something ancient in her gaze that made Elena instinctively straighten her shoulders. "Welcome to Raven's Hollow, child. I am Katerina, Nikolai's aunt." The pause before aunt was subtle, but Elena caught it. Just like she caught the way the others arranged themselves around Nikolai. Not like family, exactly, but like a pack with a clear hierarchy. "Thank you," Elena managed, accepting Katerina's cool handshake. "It's beautiful here." "Isolated," said one of the men, a redhead with scars across his knuckles. "Some find that difficult to adjust to." "That's enough, Dmitri," Nikolai said quietly, but his voice carried a warning that made the other man immediately step back. Elena watched this exchange with growing unease. There was something happening here beneath the surface, currents of power and dominance that she couldn't quite grasp. And at the center of it all was her new husband, who commanded respect with nothing more than a shift in his tone. "Come," Katerina said, linking her arm through Elena's. "Let me show you to your rooms while the men discuss business." As they walked toward the main house, Elena caught fragments of conversation behind them, words in what sounded like Russian, spoken too quickly for her to follow. But she didn't miss the urgency in their voices, or the way Nikolai's replies seemed to calm whatever concerns they were raising. The house was even more impressive inside than out. Soaring ceilings supported by massive timber beams gave way to rooms filled with antique furniture and artwork that probably cost more than most people's houses. But it was the tapestries that caught Elena's attention, woven scenes of forests and hunts, of wolves running beneath full moons. "Nikolai has quite an obsession with wolves," she observed as they climbed a grand staircase. Katerina's laugh was like silver bells. "You could say that. It runs in the family." They stopped before an ornate door at the end of a long hallway. Katerina pushed it open to reveal a suite that took Elena's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the forest, while a massive stone fireplace dominated one wall. The furniture was elegantly appointed, but somehow managed to feel warm and welcoming despite its obvious expense. "This is yours," Katerina said. "Nikolai's rooms are through that door, should you need anything." Elena's cheeks heated. She'd been wondering about the sleeping arrangements, but hadn't known how to ask. "We're not... that is, we don't... share a bed?" Katerina's smile was knowing. "Not unless you choose to. Nikolai is many things, but he's not a brute. Your marriage may be unconventional, but you are still his wife. He will protect you, even from himself." There was something ominous in that last statement that made Elena's pulse quicken. "What do you mean, protect me from himself?" But Katerina was already moving toward the door. "Dinner is at 8. We dress formally." She paused at the threshold, her amber eyes serious. "Elena, a word of advice. There are parts of this house, parts of this land that are private. If a door is locked, don't try to open it. If someone tells you not to go somewhere, listen. And whatever you do, don't go into the forest alone after dark." Before Elena could ask why, the older woman was gone, leaving her alone in her beautiful prison with more questions than answers, and the growing certainty that she'd married into something far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. Outside her window, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, and somewhere in the distance, she could have sworn she heard the howl of wolves. Chapter 3. Dinner with Wolves. Elena had packed light for what she'd assumed would be a temporary arrangement, so the formal gowns hanging in the walk-in closet were both a surprise and a relief. She chose a midnight blue dress that hugged her curves without being overtly seductive, paired with simple silver jewelry that felt appropriate for meeting Nikolai's mysterious family. As she applied a final coat of lipstick, Elena caught herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The last few weeks had carved hollows under her cheekbones and left dark circles under her eyes. But there was something else now. A wariness that hadn't been there before, like a deer that had caught the scent of predators. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Katerina. Instead, Nikolai filled the doorway, and Elena's breath caught. He'd changed from his business suit into black slacks and a charcoal sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His dark hair was still damp from a shower, and she caught that same wild scent she'd noticed at the hospital. Pine and mountain air, and something essentially male. "You look beautiful," he said simply, but his eyes traveled over her with an intensity that made heat pool in her stomach. "Thank you." Elena smoothed her hands over the dress, suddenly nervous. "The clothes. Did you buy these for me?" Katerina handled it. She has excellent taste. He stepped into the room, moving with that predatory grace that seemed as natural to him as breathing. "How are you settling in?" "It's overwhelming," Elena admitted. "This place, your family. It's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" She considered the question, studying his face for clues about the man she'd married. "I don't know. Maybe a penthouse in the city? A trophy wife situation where I'd be seen and not heard?" Something flickered in his storm gray eyes. "Is that what you think you are? A trophy?" "Aren't I?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended. A desperate woman willing to sell herself for her brother's life? Nikolai was across the room in 3 quick strides, stopping close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You saved your brother's life by making an impossible choice. That doesn't make you desperate, it makes you fierce. And anyone who sees you as anything less than extraordinary is a fool." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This close, she could see flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could smell that intoxicating scent that made her think of wild places and freedom. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. "I know you worked 3 jobs to put your brother through college. I know you've never taken a vacation longer than 3 days because you couldn't afford to. I know you volunteer at the animal shelter on your days off, even though you're exhausted." Elena stared at him, shocked by how much he'd learned about her in such a short time. "You investigated me. I had to know who I was bringing into my home." His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and Elena felt that touch like lightning through her entire body. "But the reports didn't tell me the most important thing, which is how you'd make me feel." The confession seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. His hand dropped away from her face, and he stepped back, his expression shuddering. "We should go down. The others will be waiting." Elena followed him through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, all of whom seemed to share Nikolai's sharp cheekbones and piercing eyes. As they descended the main staircase, she could hear voices from what she assumed was the dining room. Low, musical conversation in multiple languages. The dining room itself was magnificent, dominated by a table that could easily seat 20. Tonight, only 8 places were set, and Elena recognized the faces from their arrival. Dmitri with his red hair and scarred knuckles, Katerina with her silver hair and amber eyes, and several others whose names she hadn't caught. "Everyone, you remember Elena," Nikolai said as he pulled out her chair. The gesture was courtly, old-fashioned in a way that sent warmth spreading through her chest. The meal that followed was unlike anything Elena had ever experienced. Course after course of expertly prepared food appeared. Wild game, fresh vegetables that somehow tasted more vibrant than anything she'd ever eaten, wine that probably cost more than her monthly rent. But it was the conversation that truly captivated her. These people talked about literature and art and philosophy with casual intelligence, switching seamlessly between English and Russian and what sounded like several other languages. They debated politics and history as if they'd lived through the events themselves, their voices passionate but respectful. "You're very quiet, Elena," Katerina observed during a lull in the conversation. "Are we overwhelming you?" "Just listening," Elena replied honestly. "You're all incredibly well educated." "We've had time to accumulate knowledge," said a dark-haired woman named Anya, whose smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Some of us more than others." There was something pointed in that comment, and Elena caught the sharp look Nikolai sent in Anya's direction. Another undercurrent she didn't understand. Another piece of the puzzle that was her new life. "Tell us about your work, Elena," Dmitri said, his Russian accent thick enough to cut. "Katerina mentioned you help animals?" "I volunteer at an animal shelter," Elena explained. "It's not much, but I've always felt connected to animals, I suppose. They're honest in ways that people often aren't." An odd silence fell over the table. Elena looked around, confused by the sudden tension, but everyone seemed to be carefully avoiding eye contact. "What kind of animals?" Katerina asked quietly. "All kinds. Cats, dogs, the occasional rabbit or bird. But I've always had a special affinity for—" Elena hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish. "This will sound crazy, but I've always been drawn to wolves. Not that we get many at an urban shelter, but there's something about their intelligence, their loyalty to their pack." The silence stretched longer this time, and Elena felt heat creep up her neck. "I told you it would sound crazy." "Not crazy at all," Nikolai said, but his voice was carefully controlled. "Wolves are remarkable creatures, misunderstood by most people." "Dangerous, though," Anya added with a smile that showed too many teeth. "Even the most civilized wolf is still a predator at heart." Elena looked between them, that prickle of unease returning. "Are there wolves in these mountains?" "Oh yes," Katerina said softly. "These mountains are full of wolves. Have been for centuries." Thunder rumbled overhead, and Elena realized a storm had blown in while they were dining. Lightning flickered beyond the tall windows, illuminating the dark forest that pressed close to the house. "I should check on the perimeter," Dmitri said, rising from his chair. "The weather makes everyone restless." Several of the others murmured agreement and began to excuse themselves. Elena watched in confusion as the dinner party dissolved. Around her, everyone suddenly urgent about tasks that hadn't seemed important moments before. "Is everything all right?" she asked Nikolai as they found themselves alone at the long table. He was staring out at the storm, his jaw tight with tension. "Just mountain weather. It affects people differently up here." But Elena could see the lie in his eyes, could sense the coiled energy in his body like a spring wound too tight. Outside, the wind howled through the trees with a sound that was almost like— "Elena," Nikolai said sharply, drawing her attention back to him. "Promise me something." "What?" "Tonight, whatever you hear, whatever sounds come from outside your window, don't investigate. Don't leave your room. Can you promise me that?" Elena stared at him, her heart beginning to race. "Nikolai, what's going on? What aren't you telling me?" His hand covered hers on the table, and she was shocked by how warm his skin was, almost feverish. "Promise me." The urgency in his voice, the desperate edge to his gray eyes, made her nod even though every instinct screamed that she was missing something crucial. "I promise." Relief flickered across his features, but it was tinged with something that looked almost like regret. "Good. I'll have someone escort you back to your room." As if summoned, Katerina appeared in the doorway. But as Elena rose to follow her, She caught sight of Nikolai's reflection in the darkened window, and her blood turned to ice. For just a moment, his eyes flashed golden in the lightning, wild and inhuman. And when he smiled at something, Dmitri whispered in his ear. His canines seemed too sharp, too pointed. "Wolves are remarkable creatures," he'd said, misunderstood by most people. Elena's steps faltered as pieces of an impossible puzzle began clicking into place, but Katerina's gentle hand on her elbow urged her forward, away from revelations that might shatter everything she thought she knew about the world. Outside, the storm raged on, and somewhere in its fury, Elena could swear she heard the howling of wolves. Chapter 4. The Truth. In moonlight. Elena lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling as wind rattled the windows of her elegant prison. Every sound from outside made her pulse quicken, the crack of branches, the rustle of leaves, and underneath it all, that haunting howling that seemed to echo from multiple directions at once. She'd promised Nikolai she wouldn't leave her room, but curiosity warred with obedience as the storm raged on. The golden flash in his eyes haunted her, along with fragments of memory that suddenly seemed significant. The way his family moved like a coordinated pack. Katerina's warning about locked doors and staying inside after dark. The obsession with wolves that decorated every room. When the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 a.m, Elena finally gave up on sleep. She padded to the window in her silk nightgown, pressing her face to the cool glass to peer out at the storm-lashed forest. Lightning illuminated the landscape in stark black and white, and in that brief moment of clarity, she saw them. Wolves. Dozens of them, moving through the trees with purpose rather than the random wandering of wild animals. They were enormous, far larger than any wolves she'd seen in documentaries, with sleek coats that ranged from silver to black to russet red. And at their head, a massive black wolf with eyes that gleamed like molten gold. Elena's breath fogged the glass as she watched, transfixed. The black wolf lifted its muzzle to the sky and released a howl that seemed to pierce straight through her chest, calling to something primal and wild that she'd never known existed within her. Then the lightning faded, plunging the forest back into darkness, and she was left wondering if she'd imagined the entire thing. A soft knock at the connecting door to Nikolai's room made her jump. She hesitated for a moment, then crossed the room and opened it. Nikolai stood in the doorway, shirtless and breathing hard, his dark hair disheveled as if he'd been running. Rain droplets clung to his skin, and that wild scent rolled off him in waves. Pine and earth and something indefinably masculine that made her mouth go dry. "I saw you at the window," he said, his voice rough. "I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Elena's eyes traced the defined muscles of his chest, noting scratches that looked fresh, still seeping tiny drops of blood. "Nikolai, where have you been?" His jaw tightened. "Out in the storm. Sometimes the weather makes it difficult to stay inside." Elena stepped closer, drawn by impulses she didn't understand. Her fingers hovered over one of the scratches on his shoulder. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." But he didn't pull away when she touched him, his skin burning hot under her fingertips. "Let me clean these," she said, remembering the first aid kit she'd seen in the bathroom. "They could get infected." "Elena." There was warning in his voice, but also longing, and she pretended not to hear the former. "Sit," she commanded, guiding him to the chair by the fireplace. He obeyed with surprising docility, watching her with those storm-gray eyes as she fetched supplies and began tending to his wounds. The scratches were deep, too precise to be from branches or thorns. They looked almost like claw marks, as if he'd been in a fight with something wild and dangerous. Elena worked in silence, hyper-aware of the way his muscles tensed under her touch, the way his breathing hitched when her hair brushed against his shoulder. "There," she said finally, smoothing the last bandage into place. That should help them heal. When she looked up, she found Nikolai staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. "You're very gentle," he said softly. "I'd forgotten what that felt like." Something in his voice made her chest ache. "How long has it been since someone took care of you?" His laugh was bitter. "Longer than you could imagine. My kind. We're not accustomed to tenderness. My kind." Elena filed that phrase away with all the other clues she was collecting. What kind is that? For a moment, she thought he might actually tell her. His lips parted, and she saw the war playing out in his eyes, the desire to confess warring with what looked like fear. "The dangerous kind," he said finally. Elena's hand was still resting on his shoulder, and she could feel the tension coiled in his muscles like a spring ready to snap. "Are you dangerous to me?" "Yes." The word came out like a growl, and his eyes flashed gold for just an instant before returning to gray. "God help me, yes." "Then why does being near you feel like the safest I've ever been?" The question hung between them. Heavy with implications neither was ready to voice. Nikolai's hand came up to cover hers, his thumb tracing circles on her knuckles. "Elena," he said, his voice hoarse. "There are things about me, about this place, that you don't understand. Things that would terrify you if you knew. Try me." She leaned closer, drawn by the heat radiating from his skin, by the way he was looking at her like she was something precious and fragile. "I'm stronger than you think. I know you are. That's what terrifies me." His free hand came up to cup her cheek, mirroring the gesture from earlier that evening. "You deserve better than the darkness I carry." "Maybe that's not your choice to make." Lightning flashed outside, and in that moment of illumination, Elena saw something shift in Nikolai's expression. The careful control he maintained slipped just a little, revealing hunger and longing and something wilder than either. "If I kiss you," he said quietly, "everything changes." There's no going back. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She should step away, should remember that this was a business arrangement, that she barely knew this man who'd swept into her life with impossible solutions and darker mysteries. Instead, she found herself leaning closer. "Maybe I don't want to go back." The words had barely left her lips before Nikolai's mouth was on hers, claiming her with a hunger that stole her breath. His kiss was nothing like the gentle pecks she'd shared with the few men she'd dated. It was fierce and desperate and full of barely leashed power that made her knees weak. Elena melted into him, her hands fisting in his dark hair as he pulled her closer. She could taste the storm on his lips, could feel the tremor in his strong hands as they framed her face. When his tongue traced the seam of her lips, she opened for him with a soft moan that seemed to drive him wild. He broke away abruptly, breathing hard, his eyes blazing gold in the firelight. "Elena, stop! You don't know what you're doing!" "Yes, I do." She was breathless, dizzy with want, and something deeper she was afraid to name. "I'm choosing you." "You don't know me." "Then tell me." Her hands pressed against his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palms. "Tell me your secrets, Nikolai. Trust me with the truth." For a long moment, he stared at her, and Elena thought he might actually do it. Might finally give her the answers to all the questions that had been building since the moment she'd signed that contract. Instead, he stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging." Elena watched him retreat toward the connecting door, frustration and hurt warring in her chest. Running away doesn't make the truth disappear. He paused at the threshold, his hand gripping the doorframe so tightly his knuckles went white. Some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud, and some secrets eat you alive from the inside. When he looked back at her, His expression was full of regret and longing, and something that might have been love if she hadn't known him for such a short time. "Good night, Elena," he said softly, and disappeared into his room. Elena stood alone by the dying fire, her lips still tingling from his kiss, her body humming with unfulfilled desire. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to subside, but inside her chest, a different kind of tempest was just beginning. She was falling for her mysterious husband, and every instinct she possessed warned her that the truth about Nikolai Volkov would either set them both free or destroy everything she thought she knew about the world. Chapter 5. The Pull of the Wild. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through her windows and the sound of voices in the courtyard below. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling with dewdrops that caught the morning light like scattered diamonds. But the memory of Nikolai's kiss lingered on her lips, along with the questions that had multiplied tenfold in the harsh light of day. She dressed quickly in jeans and a sweater, her movements sharp with frustration. If Nikolai thought one passionate kiss followed by cryptic warnings would satisfy her curiosity, he was sorely mistaken. Elena had spent her entire adult life solving problems and refusing to accept defeat. Her husband's secrets would be no different. The voices below grew louder, and she moved to the window to investigate. In the courtyard, Nikolai stood with Dmitri and two other men she didn't recognize, their postures tense with urgency. Even from 3 stories up, she could see the strain in Nikolai's shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Elena pressed closer to the glass, trying to catch fragments of their conversation, but they were speaking in rapid Russian. Whatever they were discussing, it was clearly serious, and potentially dangerous, judging by the weapons she could see holstered beneath their jackets. A soft knock interrupted her eavesdropping. "Come in," she called, stepping back from the window. Katarina entered carrying a breakfast tray, her amber eyes sharp with assessment. "You look tired, child. Did the storm keep you awake?" "Something like that." Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. "What's happening out there? Nikolai looks ready for a war." "Territory disputes," Katarina said carefully. "There are other families in these mountains. Sometimes boundaries need to be reinforced." More half-truths and careful evasions. Elena set down her cup with more force than necessary. "Does anyone in this house ever give a straight answer?" Katarina's smile was sympathetic but firm. "Some answers come with prices too high to pay. Would you truly want knowledge that could put you in danger?" "Yes," Elena said without hesitation. "I would. Because right now, not knowing feels more dangerous than any truth could be." The older woman studied her for a long moment, something like approval flickering in her eyes. "You're stronger than Nikolai gives you credit for. But strength doesn't make you immune to consequences." Before Elena could press for clarification, male voices in the hallway announced the arrival of the men from the courtyard. Elena heard Nikolai's deep tones, followed by others speaking in urgent undertones. Whatever was happening, it was escalating. "I should go," Katarina said, rising gracefully. "But Elena, a word of advice. If you truly want answers, sometimes you have to be willing to seek them yourself." The words were barely out of her mouth before she was gone, leaving Elena staring at the closed door and wondering if she'd just been given permission or a warning. The house felt different in daylight. Less mysterious, perhaps, but no less imposing. Elena wandered the corridors, ostensibly exploring but actually looking for clues about the family that had taken her in. The portraits lining the walls were particularly fascinating. The faces changed with each generation, but certain features remained constant. The sharp cheekbones, the piercing eyes, the aura of barely contained power. And the wolves, always wolves, woven into tapestries, carved into furniture, painted into landscapes. It was as if the entire family was obsessed with the creatures. Elena found herself in what appeared to be a library, its walls lined floor to ceiling with books in multiple languages. She pulled volumes at random, finding everything from classical literature to texts on folklore and mythology. One section seemed particularly well-worn, and when she investigated, she discovered books on lycanthropy, shape-shifting legends, and something called the old ways that made her pulse quicken. Interesting reading choices. Elena spun around to find Anya lounging in the doorway, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, and her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Up close, Elena could see that the woman was stunning in the same predatory way as the rest of Nikolai's family, but there was something calculating in her green eyes that set Elena's teeth on edge. "Just browsing," Elena said, sliding the book back onto the shelf. "The collection is impressive. Nikolai's great-grandfather was quite the scholar, obsessed with documenting old legends, family histories." Anya moved into the room with that fluid grace they all seemed to share. He believed that understanding the past was the key to controlling the future. "And what do you believe?" Anya's laugh was like broken glass. "I believe that some legends exist for good reasons, and that humans who stumble into worlds beyond their understanding rarely survive the experience." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Elena straightened her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated. "Good thing I'm more resilient than I look." "Are you?" Anya circled closer, and Elena caught that same wild scent that clung to Nikolai, but sharper, more aggressive. "Tell me, little mouse, what do you think you've married into?" "A complicated family with trust issues," Elena replied evenly. "Try again." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Anya was close enough now that Elena could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, could sense the coiled tension in her deceptively delicate frame. "I think," Elena said carefully, "that you're all hiding something that would sound impossible to most people. Something that explains why you live so far from civilization, why you speak in riddles, and why Nikolai warned me not to go into the forest after dark." Anya's smile widened, showing teeth that seemed just a little too sharp. "Very good. And what do you plan to do with that theory?" "Find out if I'm right." "Even if the truth could get you killed?" Elena thought of Miguel lying in his hospital bed, of the desperate bargain she'd made to save him, of the way Nikolai had kissed her like she was both salvation and damnation. "I've already risked everything for the people I care about. I'm not about to start playing it safe now." Something shifted in Anya's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or grudging respect. "Interesting. No wonder he's so conflicted about you." "What do you mean?" But Anya was already moving toward the door, her moment of openness clearly over. "Ask him yourself. If you're brave enough." Elena was left alone in the library, her heart racing and her mind spinning with implications. She pulled the book on lycanthropy back from the shelf, flipping through pages that detailed transformation myths, pack hierarchies, and ancient curses. One passage made her blood run cold. The old bloodlines carry burdens that cannot be shared with outsiders. To bind oneself to such a creature is to accept a fate beyond mortal understanding. Love becomes both salvation and curse, for the human heart cannot long survive in a world of tooth and claw. Elena slammed the book shut, but the words had already burned themselves into her memory. She thought of Nikolai's warning about being dangerous, of the way his family moved like predators, of the massive wolves she'd seen in the White Sea storm. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, forming a picture so impossible that her rational mind rejected it entirely. But her heart, the part of her that had always been drawn to wild creatures and untamed places, whispered that she'd found exactly where she belonged. Outside, storm clouds were gathering again, and somewhere in the distance, Elena could swear she heard the lonely howl of wolves calling to each other across the mountains. Tonight, she decided, she would have her answers. Even if they changed everything she thought she knew about the world. And about herself. Chapter 6. Shadows and Moonlight. The rest of the day passed in a haze of careful politeness and mounting tension. Elena had lunch with Katerina, who spoke eloquently about art and music while skillfully deflecting every attempt Elena made to steer the conversation toward more substantial topics. The afternoon was spent touring the estate's gardens with Dmitri, who proved surprisingly knowledgeable about medicinal plants, but went silent whenever Elena asked about the locked buildings scattered throughout the property. By evening, Elena felt like a caged animal herself, pacing her room as she waited for the household to settle into sleep. She'd seen Nikolai only briefly at dinner, where he'd been distracted and distant, his attention focused on whatever crisis had brought those armed men to the estate. Every time their eyes met across the table, she saw worry and something that looked like guilt, as if he knew she was closer to uncovering his secrets than he was comfortable with. Now, as the grandfather clock chimed midnight, Elena finally put her plan into action. She'd changed into dark clothing and soft-soled shoes, her heart hammering as she quietly opened her bedroom door and peered into the hallway. The corridor was empty, lit only by moonlight streaming through tall windows. Elena slipped out of her room and made her way toward the main staircase, avoiding the floorboards she'd noticed creaking during her earlier explorations. The house seemed to hold its breath around her, as if the very walls were complicit in her midnight rebellion. She reached the ground floor without incident and headed for the French doors that led to the gardens. The lock was old but well-maintained, and it yielded to her gentle pressure with barely a whisper. Elena stepped outside into the cool mountain air, pulling her jacket tighter as she surveyed the moonlit landscape. The forest beckoned from beyond the formal gardens, dark and mysterious under the star-filled sky. Elena had spent hours studying the estate's layout from her window, and she'd identified what looked like a well-worn path leading into the trees. If she was going to find answers about Nikolai and his family, that seemed like the logical place to start. The path was easier to follow than she'd expected, clearly maintained despite the wild appearance of the surrounding forest. Ancient pine trees towered overhead, their branches creating a cathedral of shadows and silver light. The further she walked, the more Elena felt a strange sense of homecoming, as if some part of her had been waiting her entire life to walk among these trees. 20 minutes into her journey, she heard them. Voices, low and musical, drifting through the trees ahead. Elena slowed her pace, moving more carefully as she approached what sounded like a clearing. Through the undergrowth, she could see the flicker of firelight and moving shadows that suggested a gathering of some kind. Elena crept closer, her pulse racing with equal parts fear and excitement. What she saw when she finally found a vantage point between two massive oak trees made her blood run cold. A circle of people stood around a roaring bonfire, but they weren't entirely people anymore. Some still retained human form, though their eyes glowed gold in the firelight, and their movements held that predatory grace she'd noticed in Nikolai's family. Others were caught between human and something else. Bodies elongated, faces shifting, hands that were becoming claws. And at the center of the circle, magnificent and terrifying, stood the massive black wolf she'd seen during the storm. Even in this form, she knew it was Nikolai. The intelligence in those golden eyes, the way the others deferred to his presence, the sheer power that radiated from his enormous frame. It could be no one else. Elena pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp as the truth crashed over her in waves. Werewolves. They were all werewolves. The family that had welcomed her into their home, the man she'd married, the people who'd been treating her with such careful courtesy. They were creatures out of legend and nightmare. But even as her rational mind screamed at her to run, another part of her felt a deep sense of recognition. This was why she'd always been drawn to wolves, why wild creatures had never frightened her the way they did other people. She was witnessing something ancient and powerful, something that called to a part of her soul she'd never understood. The black wolf's head turned suddenly, and those golden eyes locked onto hers across the clearing. Elena's breath caught as she realized she'd been discovered, but instead of aggression, she saw surprise in Nikolai's gaze. And underneath that, something that might have been relief. The other wolves followed his stare, and Elena found herself the focus of a dozen pairs of inhuman eyes. She should have been terrified. She should have run screaming back to the house and demanded to be taken back to civilization immediately. Instead, she stepped out from behind the trees and into the clearing. A ripple of tension went through the assembled pack, some of them shifting into more threatening postures. But the black wolf, Nikolai, stepped forward, placing himself between Elena and the others. His message was clear. She was under his protection. "I'm sorry," Elena said quietly, addressing the wolf even though she felt foolish talking to what appeared to be an animal. "I didn't mean to intrude. I needed to know." The wolf stared at her for a long moment, then threw back his massive head and howled. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, full of longing and regret, and something that sounded almost like an apology. The other wolves took up the call, their voices weaving together in a harmony that made Elena's chest ache with emotions she couldn't name. When the howling faded, the black wolf began to change. Elena watched in fascination and horror as Nikolai's transformation reversed itself. Fur receded to reveal skin, muscles, and bones reshaping themselves with sounds that should have been sickening but somehow weren't. Within moments, her husband stood before her in human form, naked and magnificent in the firelight. Someone, Dmitri, she thought, tossed him a pair of pants, which he pulled on without taking his eyes off Elena's face. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I am." Elena took a step closer, surprised by her own calm. "This is what you were hiding. What you were trying to protect me from. I told you I was dangerous." "No," Elena said, studying his face in the firelight. "You told me you thought you were dangerous. There's a difference." Katarina emerged from the circle, having resumed her human form while Elena was focused on Nikolai. "Child, do you understand what you've seen tonight?" "I think so." Elena looked around the circle at faces that were now familiar but somehow different in this context. "You're all what you are. A pack. A family," Nikolai corrected. "Bound by blood and choice and responsibilities you can't imagine. Then help me imagine them?" Elena's voice was steady despite the way her heart was racing. "Stop treating me like I'm made of glass. I'm here, I've seen the truth, and I'm not running away screaming. Doesn't that count for something?" Nikolai moved closer, his eyes searching her face. "You're not afraid." "I'm terrified," Elena admitted. "But not of you. Never of you." Something shifted in his expression, hope warring with disbelief. "Elena, I know what I saw in that hospital," she said, taking another step toward him. "You saved my brother's life, but it wasn't just about money, was it? There was something else. Something you needed from this arrangement." Nikolai's jaw tightened. "There are laws, old laws that govern our kind. To maintain our territory, our pack's legitimacy, I needed a mate," Katerina finished quietly. "Our kind doesn't recognize temporary alliances. The bond you formed when you married Elena, even under false pretenses, has consequences neither of you understood." Elena felt the world tilt on its axis. What kind of consequences? Nikolai's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "The kind that make it impossible for me to let you go, even when the year is up. The kind that put you in danger just by being near me." "What if I don't want you to let me go?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that would change everything. Around the fire, the pack watched in silence, witnesses to a moment that would define not just Elena and Nikolai's future, but the future of their entire family. In the distance, storm clouds gathered once again, and Elena realized that some decisions, once made, could never be undone. Chapter 7. The Ancient Bond. The silence that followed Elena's declaration stretched like a taut wire, charged with possibilities and dangers she was only beginning to understand. Around the fire, the pack remained motionless, their inhuman eyes reflecting the dancing flames as they waited for their alpha's response. Nikolai stared at her as if she were a ghost, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. "You don't know what you're saying." "Then explain it to me." Elena stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin, to see the war raging in his storm-gray eyes. "Stop protecting me from the truth, and trust me to handle it." Katerina moved to stand beside them, her amber eyes grave. "Child, what Nikolai isn't telling you is that the bond between you has already begun. The moment you spoke your vows, even in that sterile courthouse, something ancient was set in motion." "What kind of bond?" Elena's voice was steadier than she felt. "A mating bond," Dmitri said from across the fire, his scarred hands flexing unconsciously. "Among our kind, it's sacred, unbreakable." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "Unbreakable. It starts as a thread," Katerina explained gently. "Barely noticeable at first, but with proximity, with shared experiences, with..." She glanced meaningfully at Nikolai. "Physical contact, it strengthens. Eventually, it becomes impossible to sever without destroying both parties." Elena's hand flew to her chest, where she'd been feeling an inexplicable ache whenever Nikolai was away from her. "I thought it was just... attraction." "It's more than that now," Nikolai said quietly. "Much more, and it will only get stronger." "Is that why you've been avoiding me today?" Elena studied his face, seeing the careful distance he'd maintained in a new light. "You're trying to slow the process." His laugh was bitter. "I'm trying to give you a choice while you still have one. And what happens if I choose to stay? If I accept this bond?" The pack exchanged glances, and Elena caught undercurrents of emotion she couldn't interpret. Fear, hope, concern, and something that might have been relief. "You would become one of us," Anya said, stepping forward from the shadows. Her earlier hostility had been replaced by something like respect. "Not physically. The ability to shift is inherited, not shared. But you would be bound to our laws, our customs, our enemies." "What enemies?" This time it was Nikolai who answered, his voice heavy, with old pain. "There are those who would see our kind extinct. Hunters who believe we're nothing more than monsters to be eliminated. Other packs who covet our territory. And worse, creatures that make werewolves look tame by comparison." Elena absorbed this information, pieces of a much larger puzzle clicking into place. "The men who came today, the weapons, you're preparing for a fight. The Volkov pack has held these mountains for 3 centuries, Dmitri said proudly. "But our numbers have dwindled. Other families see us as weak, vulnerable. Having a human mate doesn't help our reputation," Anya added bluntly. "Some see it as a sign that our bloodline is failing." "Enough!" Nikolai's voice cracked like a whip, and several pack members actually stepped back. Elena didn't ask for any of this. She married a stranger to save her brother's life, not to become embroiled in supernatural politics. "But I'm already embroiled, aren't I?" Elena looked around the circle of faces, seeing past their inhuman beauty to the loyalty and fierce protectiveness underneath. "The moment I signed that contract, I became part of this whether I understood it or not. Katarina nodded slowly. The old magic doesn't distinguish between willing and unwilling bonds. Intent matters less than action. Then let me choose now, Elena said, turning back to Nikolai. With full knowledge of what I'm choosing, tell me what this bond means, really means, and let me decide for myself. Nikolai's hands shook as he reached for her, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw with devastating tenderness. It means your life becomes tied to mine in ways that go beyond human understanding. You'll feel what I feel, need what I need. The urge to protect you will drive me to violence against anyone who threatens you, and you'll experience a similar compulsion toward me. That doesn't sound terrible, Elena whispered. It means when I shift, you'll feel the pull of the moon in your own bones. You'll hunger for wild places and freedom in ways that might drive you mad. It means if I die, the bond will try to take you with me. Elena's breath caught. And if I die, then I follow you into darkness, he said simply. There's no question, no choice. The bond doesn't allow survival without one's mate. The weight of what he was describing settled over her like a heavy cloak. This wasn't the romantic fairy tale she might have imagined. It was cosmic, terrifying, absolute. And yet, show me, she said suddenly. Nikolai frowned. Show you what? The bond. Whatever connection already exists between us. I want to feel it. Elena. You're asking me to make a choice that will define the rest of my life. I need to understand what I'm choosing. Nikolai looked to Katerina, who nodded slowly. She has the right to know what she's accepting or rejecting. With obvious reluctance, Nikolai closed his eyes and seemed to reach for something deep within himself. Elena felt a flutter in her chest, like a butterfly's wings against her ribs, and then warmth began to spread through her body. It started as a whisper, awareness of Nikolai's presence that went beyond her physical senses. She could feel his heartbeat as if it were her own, could sense the barely leashed power that ran through his veins like liquid fire. But underneath the raw strength, she felt something else. Loneliness so profound it made her ache, and a desperate longing for connection that mirrored her own deepest desires. The sensation intensified, and suddenly Elena could feel everything. His protective instincts toward his pack, his fierce love for the wild places he called home, his struggle to balance his human and wolf natures. And threaded through it all, growing stronger by the moment, was his need for her. Not just physical desire, though that was certainly present, but something deeper. A recognition that she was the missing piece of his soul. Elena gasped, staggering as the connection became almost overwhelming. Nikolai caught her immediately, his arms strong and sure around her waist. Too much, he said, pulling back the bond until it faded to a barely perceptible whisper. I'm sorry. I should have warned you. No, Elena breathed, her hands fisting in his shirt as she fought to keep him close. Don't apologize. That was incredible. That was just the beginning, Katerina said quietly. If you complete the bond, if you choose to accept it fully, the connection will be 10 times stronger. Elena looked up at Nikolai, seeing her own wonder reflected in his eyes. The rational part of her mind cataloged all the reasons this was insane. She'd known him for less than a week. She was human, and he was something out of mythology. Accepting the bond would mean giving up any chance of a normal life. But her heart whispered that normal had never been what she wanted anyway. Her entire life, she'd felt like she was waiting for something, searching for a place where she truly belonged. And standing here in this circle of firelight, surrounded by creatures of legend and bound to a man who could shift between human and wolf, she finally felt like she'd come home. I need time to think, she said finally, though every instinct screamed at her to claim him here and now. Nikolai nodded, though she could feel his disappointment through their fledgling connection. Of course, this isn't a decision to make lightly. But not too much time, Dmitri warned. The pack that's been challenging our borders grows bolder. They see our alpha without a recognized mate as weakness. If they decide to attack, they won't get the chance, Elena said with quiet steel in her voice, surprising herself with the conviction. Whatever I decide, I won't let anyone hurt this family. The words hung in the air like a vow, and Elena realized she'd already made her choice. She just needed the courage to voice it. Chapter 8. The Hunter's Moon. Elena returned to the house with her mind spinning and her heart racing from revelations that had shattered everything she thought she knew about the world. Nikolai had walked her back in tense silence, the connection between them humming with unspoken possibilities and fears. Now, as she sat in her room watching the first hint of dawn creep across the sky, she tried to process the magnitude of what she'd learned. She was married to a werewolf, a creature of myth and legend who could shift between human and wolf at will. And somehow, through forces she didn't understand, they were becoming bound together in ways that transcended normal human relationships. Elena should have been terrified, should have been planning her escape, demanding to be returned to her normal life immediately. Instead, she found herself thinking about the loneliness she'd felt through their bond, the fierce protectiveness that had radiated from every member of the pack, and the way Nikolai had looked at her as if she were something precious beyond measure. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. "Come in," she called, expecting Katerina with breakfast and gentle probing about her mental state. Instead, Nikolai entered, fully dressed in dark clothing that looked tactical rather than casual. His face was grim, and Elena felt a spike of alarm through their connection before he managed to shield it from her. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. Elena rose from her chair by the window, noting the weapons strapped to his body. "What kind of problem?" "The Blackmore pack. They've been testing our borders for weeks, but last night they crossed the line." His jaw tightened. "They killed one of our scouts." Horror washed over Elena. "Killed?" "Murdered," Nikolai corrected, his voice hard as granite. "Left him displayed as a message. They're challenging my right to lead this territory." Elena felt sick. "Because of me. Because you married a human. Because they're ambitious and cruel and see any perceived weakness as an opportunity." Nikolai crossed to her, his hands gentle despite the violence radiating from every line of his body. "This isn't your fault, Elena. Marcus Blackmore has been looking for an excuse to move against us for years. But I gave him one." "No." Nikolai's voice was fierce. "I gave him one when I chose to honor the old laws instead of simply taking what I wanted, but I won't apologize for that choice." Elena studied his face, seeing the weight of leadership and the burden of protecting his pack etched in every line. "What happens now?" "Now we respond. The pack is gathering for a hunt. We'll track them back to their territory and make it clear that trespassing has consequences." Fear spiked through Elena's chest. "You're going after them." "I have to. If I don't respond to this challenge, every pack for 1,000 miles will see us as weak. We'll be fighting incursions constantly." Elena's hands fisted in his shirt, the thought of him walking into danger making her feel physically ill. "Take me with you." "Absolutely not." "Nikolai?" "No." His voice brooked no argument. "You're human, Elena. You'd be a liability in a fight against other werewolves." The words stung, but Elena pushed past the hurt to focus on the real issue. "Then what am I supposed to do? Sit here and wait to find out if my husband comes home alive?" Something flickered in Nikolai's eyes at her casual use of the word husband. Hope, perhaps, or gratitude that she still claimed the title after everything she'd learned. "Stay with Katerina," he said. "She'll keep you safe." "For how long?" "Until the next pack decides to challenge you?" until someone targets me to get to you? Elena shook her head. I can't live like that, Nikolai. Always looking over my shoulder. Always wondering when the next threat will emerge. Then maybe you should reconsider accepting the bond, he said quietly. Maybe you should go back to your normal life while you still can. Elena stared at him, feeling the careful walls he was building between them through their connection. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. Your safety does. That's not an answer. Nikolai's control cracked, and suddenly his hands were cupping her face, his eyes blazing with desperate intensity. What I want is to claim you completely, to make you mine in every way that matters. I want to mark you so that every supernatural creature for 100 miles knows you're under my protection. I want to build a life with you that's full of wildness and freedom and the kind of love that legends are made of. Elena's breath caught. Then why? Because I also want you to live, he said simply. And loving me might get you killed. Elena reached up to cover his hands with her own, feeling the tremor in his strong fingers. Living without you might kill me anyway. They stared at each other in silence, the weight of unspoken decisions hanging between them. Finally, Elena made a choice that surprised them both. Complete the bond, she said quietly. Nikolai went very still. Elena, before you leave, before you go into danger, complete the bond between us. You don't understand what you're asking. Then show me. Elena stepped closer until they were breathing the same air. You said the bond would let me feel what you feel. If something happens to you out there, I want to know. I want to be connected to you completely. The bond works both ways, Nikolai warned. If you're in danger while I'm away, if someone tries to hurt you, I'll feel it. It could distract me at a crucial moment. Then I guess we'll both have to be very careful. Nikolai searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt or fear. Elena met his gaze steadily, letting him see her determination through their fledgling connection. Are you certain? He asked. Once this is done, there's no going back. You'll be mine, and I'll be yours, until one of us dies. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The words had barely left her lips before Nikolai's mouth was on hers, claiming her with a desperation that took her breath away. This kiss was different from the one they'd shared the night before. Deeper, more possessive, charged with power that made her skin tingle and her heart race. Elena melted into him, her hands fisting in his hair as he backed her toward the bed. She could feel something building between them, a pressure that seemed to come from the very air around them. Magic, she realized. Ancient magic that responded to their mutual consent and binding them together in ways that transcended the physical. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena could feel the change immediately. The whisper-thin connection between them had become a river of shared sensation and emotion. She could feel Nikolai's wolf just beneath his human skin, could sense his fierce protectiveness and desperate love for her like a warm current in her veins. My mate, Nikolai breathed against her lips, and Elena felt the rightness of the words settle into her bones. My husband, she replied, and watched his eyes flash gold with possession and joy. Through the window, Elena could hear the pack gathering in the courtyard below, their voices urgent with preparations for the hunt ahead. But for this moment, she and Nikolai existed in a bubble of perfect connection, bound together by forces older than civilization itself. Promise me you'll come back, Elena whispered. Promise me you'll be here when I do, he countered. Always, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance. Whether threat or warning, Elena couldn't tell. But with Nikolai's arms around her and their bond singing between them like a song of coming home, she felt ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. Chapter 9. Blood and Shadows. The hours after Nikolai left stretched endlessly. each minute feeling like an eternity. Elena had watched from her window as the pack departed, 12 wolves melting into the forest with deadly purpose, their alpha leading them into the darkness beyond the estate's protective boundaries. Through their newly completed bond, she could feel Nikolai's presence like a steady heartbeat in her chest, reassuring her that he was alive even as he moved further away. Katerina had tried to distract her with conversation about pack history and the responsibilities that came with being an alpha's mate, but Elena found it impossible to concentrate on anything beyond the constant awareness of her husband's emotional state. She felt his focus, his controlled aggression, the way his wolf reveled in the hunt, even as his human side worried about the confrontation ahead. "You're making yourself sick with worry," Katerina observed as Elena paced the length of the sitting room for the 100th time. "The bond is new. You haven't learned to filter the connection yet." "I don't want to filter it," Elena said, pressing her hand to her chest where she could feel Nikolai's presence most strongly. "If he's in danger, I need to know. And if your anxiety reaches him at a crucial moment, if it distracts him when he needs his focus most." Elena stopped pacing, the implication hitting her like a physical blow. "Can he feel what I'm feeling?" Every emotion, every sensation. The bond doesn't discriminate. Katerina's amber eyes were sympathetic but firm. "You need to learn control, child. For both your sakes." Before Elena could respond, a sharp spike of alarm shot through the bond, so intense it made her gasp and stumble. Images flashed through their connection. Darkness, the scent of blood, the gleam of yellow eyes in moonlight. "They've found them," Elena breathed, her hand going to her throat as Nikolai's adrenaline flooded her system. Katerina was at her side instantly, steadying her as the bond transmitted the chaos of battle. Elena could feel Nikolai's wolf surge to the surface, could sense his deadly focus as he engaged an enemy she couldn't see. The violence of it was overwhelming. Primal, brutal, nothing like the controlled predator she'd come to know. "Breathe," Katerina commanded. "Focus on your own heartbeat, your own breathing. Don't let his emotions drown you." Elena fought to follow the advice, but the bond pulled at her relentlessly. She could feel Nikolai's pain as claws raked across his ribs, could taste blood in her mouth though she hadn't been injured. Worse, she could sense his distraction as he tried to shield her from the worst of what he was experiencing. "He's holding back," Elena gasped. "He's trying to protect me and it's making him vulnerable." Katerina's expression darkened. "Then you need to let him know you're safe. Send him calm, send him strength. Use the bond to help him instead of hindering him." Elena closed her eyes and reached for the connection between them, trying to push past the chaos to touch the part of Nikolai that belonged to her alone. "I'm safe," she projected down the bond, pouring all her love and faith into the thought. "I'm here. I'm waiting for you." She felt him receive the message, felt his relief and renewed focus as he stopped trying to shield her from his reality. The connection stabilized, and Elena found herself experiencing the battle from Nikolai's perspective, not as overwhelming sensation, but as shared experience. Through his eyes, she saw the Blackmore pack. They were larger than she'd expected, their wolves massive and scarred from previous battles. Their alpha, Marcus, was a brute of a creature with silver-streaked fur and eyes like chips of ice. He circled Nikolai with predatory intent, clearly confident in his ability to defeat the Volkov alpha. "He's bigger than you," Elena thought, fear spiking through her. "Size isn't everything," came Nikolai's response, threaded with grim amusement. "Watch." What followed was a display of strategy and pack coordination that took Elena's breath away. Nikolai didn't engage Marcus directly. Instead, he used his pack's superior knowledge of the terrain to divide the Blackmore wolves, isolating them and forcing them into disadvantageous positions. It was like watching a chess master at work, each move calculated to achieve maximum effect with minimum risk. But Marcus was no fool. When he realized he was being outmaneuvered, he changed tactics, sending 3 of his largest wolves directly at Nikolai while he circled around to attack from behind. Elena felt Nikolai's split-second decision to abandon strategy in favor of raw power. His wolf erupted into motion, meeting the first attacker head-on with bone-crushing force. The impact reverberated through the bond, and Elena tasted blood and fury as her mate fought for their lives. The battle was brutal and swift. Elena experienced every moment, the satisfaction of teeth finding their mark, the burn of claw marks across ribs, the desperate struggle for dominance that would determine the fate of both packs. When Marcus finally went down under Nikolai's jaws, his submission echoing through the forest in a whine of defeat, Elena nearly collapsed with relief. "It's over," Nikolai's voice whispered through their bond, exhaustion and triumph coloring his mental tone. "We're coming home." Elena sank into a chair, her entire body shaking from the aftereffects of experiencing supernatural combat. "They won," she told Katerina, who had been watching her with intense concern throughout the ordeal. "I know, child. I could see it in your face." Katerina handed her a glass of brandy, which Elena accepted gratefully. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been in a fight myself," Elena admitted, downing the brandy in one burning gulp. "Is it always like that?" "The bond will settle as you grow accustomed to it. But yes, you'll always share in his experiences to some degree, just as he'll share in yours." Elena nodded, processing the implications. She was beginning to understand what Nikolai had meant when he'd warned her about the bond's intensity. This wasn't just marriage. It was a merging of souls that would affect every aspect of their lives. The sound of vehicles in the courtyard announced the pack's return. Elena shot to her feet, her heart racing as she felt Nikolai's nearness through their connection. She barely registered Katerina's knowing smile as she rushed from the room and down the main staircase. Nikolai was already coming through the front door when she reached the foyer, and Elena threw herself into his arms without hesitation. He was still covered in dirt and blood, his clothes torn from the battle, but he was alive and whole, and hers. "I felt everything," she whispered against his throat, breathing in his familiar scent beneath the smell of violence and forest. "Every moment of it." "I know." His arms tightened around her, and she could feel his wonder at their connection through the bond. "You kept me grounded. When Marcus tried to get in my head, tried to make me lose control, I could feel your strength keeping me centered." Elena pulled back to look at him, seeing new scratches across his cheekbones and a bruise darkening along his jaw. "You're hurt. Healing already." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "The bond is remarkable, Elena. I've never felt anything like it." "What happens now? With the Blackmore pack?" "They've acknowledged our territory. Marcus won't challenge us again." Nikolai's expression darkened slightly. "But word will spread about our unique situation. Other packs will test us, looking for weakness." Elena felt a chill of premonition. "More fights? Probably. Are you prepared for that? For a life where violence is always a possibility?" Elena thought about the battle she'd just experienced through their bond, about the brutal reality of the world she'd chosen to enter. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her chest, for Nikolai, for his pack, for the life they were building together. "I'm prepared for anything, as long as we face it together," she said firmly. Nikolai's smile was brilliant, transforming his battle-hardened features into something beautiful. "Together," he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of blood and moonlight and forever. Through their bond, Elena felt his love for her burning bright as a star, and knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, They would meet them as true mates, bound by forces older than time itself. Chapter 10. Secrets of the Heart. 3 days after the confrontation with the Blackmore pack, Elena was beginning to understand what it truly meant to be bonded to a werewolf alpha. The constant awareness of Nikolai's presence had become as natural as breathing, but it came with complications she hadn't anticipated. When he was tense about pack business, her shoulders knotted with sympathetic stress. When he felt the pull of the full moon approaching, her own body hummed with restless energy that made sleep impossible. But there were unexpected joys as well. She could feel his contentment when he watched her laugh with Katarina over morning coffee, could sense his pride when she successfully mediated a minor dispute between 2 younger pack members. Most powerfully, she felt his love for her like a warm current beneath everything else. Constant, unwavering, and growing stronger each day. What she hadn't expected was how the bond would begin to change her in other ways. Elena first noticed it during her morning walk through the estate gardens. The roses seemed more vibrant, their scent so intense it was almost overwhelming. She could hear conversations from inside the house with startling clarity, could distinguish individual footsteps on floors 3 stories above her. When a rabbit froze at the edge of the path, she found herself cataloging its heartbeat, its fear scent, the tension in its muscles as it prepared to bolt. The bond is awakening dormant abilities, Katerina explained when Elena mentioned the changes over lunch. Humans have more wolf in them than most realize. The connection to Nikolai is simply bringing those instincts to the surface. What kind of instincts? Elena asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew. Enhanced senses, stronger intuition, deeper connection to natural cycles. Katerina's amber eyes were knowing. Some human mates develop the ability to communicate with the pack even in wolf form. Others become unnaturally skilled at reading supernatural threats. Elena nodded slowly, remembering how she'd sensed the pack's mood shifts long before anyone spoke, how she'd known instinctively which territories were safe during her midnight exploration. Is this permanent? The bond is permanent, Katerina said gently. These changes are part of who you're becoming. The question is whether you'll embrace them or fight them. That afternoon, Elena found herself in the estate's library again, but this time she was drawn to different books. Texts on pack dynamics, the history of human werewolf bonds, and something called The Old Covenants, that made her pulse quicken with recognition she couldn't explain. She was deep in a passage about ancient territorial laws when Nikolai found her. His approach so silent she only knew he was there when his hands settled on her shoulders. "Studying for your new role?" he asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Trying to understand it," Elena replied, leaning back against his warmth. "Did you know there haven't been any human mates in the major pack bloodlines for over 50 years? I knew it was rare." Nikolai's voice carried a note of concern. "Are you having second thoughts?" Elena twisted in her chair to look at him. Through their bond, she could feel his carefully controlled anxiety, his fear that she was regretting her choice. "No second thoughts, but I'm curious about why the practice stopped." Nikolai was quiet for a long moment, his hands stilling on her shoulders. It became dangerous. The supernatural world grew more divided, more suspicious of outsiders. Human mates were seen as liabilities, security risks. Most packs forbade it entirely. But you didn't? The Volkov line has always been different. We believe in choice, in the possibility that love can transcend species. His smile was rueful. It's made us outcasts among our own kind. Elena reached up to cover his hand with hers. "Is that why your pack is so small? Because other werewolves don't approve of your policies?" "Partly. We've also lost members to wars, to the gradual modernization that's forced many of our kind into hiding." Nikolai moved around to perch on the edge of the desk, facing her. There used to be dozens of packs in these mountains. Now there are maybe 6, and most are hostile to each other. Elena felt a chill of understanding. That's why the Blackmore Challenge was so serious. You can't afford to show weakness because there are so few allies left. Exactly. Nikolai's expression darkened. And why some pack members questioned my decision to marry a human. They see it as an indulgence we can't afford. Anya, Elena said, remembering the woman's pointed comments during their first meeting. Among others. She's not wrong to be concerned. Protecting you makes me vulnerable in ways an alpha shouldn't be. Elena stood abruptly, anger flaring through their bond. I'm not some fragile flower that needs constant protection. The bond is making me stronger, Nikolai. I can feel it. Stronger isn't the same as supernatural. You're still human, Elena. Still mortal in ways that... That what? Elena challenged. That make me a burden? A weakness you have to compensate for? Nikolai's eyes flashed gold, his wolf responding to her aggressive tone. That make you the most important thing in my world. That make the thought of losing you terrifying enough to compromise my judgment. The raw honesty in his voice deflated Elena's anger as quickly as it had risen. She could feel his fear through their bond now. Not fear of her, but fear for her. The absolute terror that his love for her would get them both killed. Then teach me, she said quietly. Stop trying to shield me from your world and help me become part of it. Really part of it. Nikolai studied her face, and Elena sensed him weighing options, calculating risks. What exactly are you asking for? Training, combat skills, pack protocols, whatever I need to know to be an asset instead of a liability. Elena moved closer, her hands settling on his chest. I can feel the changes in me, Nikolai. The bond is making me something new. Help me understand what that means. Through their connection, she felt his surprise at her determination, followed by something that might have been pride. Training a human to fight supernatural creatures. It's been tried before. The results are usually tragic. Then don't train me to fight like a human. Train me to fight like your mate. Nikolai was silent for a long moment, his storm-gray eyes searching her face. Finally, he nodded slowly. There are things you'd need to learn. Old ways, dangerous knowledge. The kind of training that could change you in ways you can't imagine. I'm already changing, Elena pointed out. At least this way, I'll have some control over the process. Very well. Nikolai's decision seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. But we do this properly. Ancient protocols, sacred oaths. If you're going to become a true pack member, you'll do it with full honors. Elena felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with trepidation. What does that involve? Nikolai's smile was sharp and wild, and for a moment, she glimpsed the predator that lived beneath his human facade. Tomorrow night is the dark moon. Traditionally, it's when new pack members are initiated. You'll undergo the trials, learn the old ways, and if you survive... If I survive, you'll be more than human, more than just my mate. You'll be pack. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb tracing her lower lip. Are you certain you want this, Elena? Once you take the oath, there's no returning to your old life. Elena thought of her small apartment above the diner, of her lonely existence before Miguel's accident had brought her to this impossible place. Then she felt Nikolai's love flowing through their bond, felt the sense of belonging that had eluded her entire life finally within reach. I've never wanted anything more, she said firmly. Nikolai's kiss was fierce and possessive, full of pride and desire and something darker that made her pulse race. When they broke apart, his eyes were gold and wild. Then tomorrow night, under the dark moon, You'll learn what it truly means to run with wolves." Elena shivered at the promise in his voice, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, it would transform her completely. But as she felt their bond singing between them like a song of coming home, she realized she was ready for that transformation. She was ready to become who she was always meant to be. Chapter 11. The Dark Moon's Gift. The day of Elena's initiation dawned gray and heavy with approaching storm clouds. She woke to find Nikolai already gone, though their bond hummed with his presence somewhere in the house below. The connection carried undertones of anticipation and worry that made her stomach flutter with nervous energy. Katerina arrived with breakfast and clothes Elena had never seen before. A simple white dress made of fabric so fine it seemed to shimmer in the morning light, and a cloak of midnight blue that felt ancient beneath her fingers. "Ceremonial garments," Katerina explained, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "They've been worn by every woman initiated into the Volkov pack for 3 centuries. Elena touched the delicate embroidery along the dress's hem, silver wolves running beneath a starless sky. "How many women have worn these?" 7, including you. We've never been a large pack and human mates." Katerina's voice trailed off diplomatically. "Are rare," Elena finished. "What happened to the others?" Katerina's amber eyes grew distant. "Some lived long, happy lives with their mates. Others—" She shook her head. "The bond is powerful, Elena, but it's not a guarantee of survival. The supernatural world is dangerous for those who aren't born to it." A chill ran down Elena's spine, but she pushed the fear aside. She'd come too far to let doubt undermine her now. "What should I expect tonight?" "I can't tell you the specifics. The trials must be experienced, not explained. But I will say this. Trust your instincts. The bond with Nikolai has awakened things in you that you don't fully understand yet. Tonight, you'll learn to use them." Elena spent the day in restless preparation. She tried to read, tried to walk in the gardens, tried to meditate the way Katerina had taught her. Nothing helped. The approaching ceremony pulled at her like a physical force, making her skin prickle with anticipation and her pulse race with inexplicable excitement. As evening fell, the entire pack gathered in the great hall. Elena descended the main staircase in her ceremonial dress, hyper-aware of every eye upon her. The pack members stood in formal array, Dmitri with his scarred hands clasped behind his back, Anya with something like respect in her green eyes, and others whose names she was still learning. At the center of them all stood Nikolai, magnificent in black leather that emphasized every line of his powerful frame. When their eyes met across the room, Elena felt their bond flare with shared emotion. Love, pride, and underneath it all, a wild anticipation that made her blood sing. "Elena Vasquez Volkov," Katerina's voice rang out formally. "You have asked to be accepted fully into this pack, to share in our burdens and our strengths. Do you come to this ceremony of your own free will?" "I do," Elena replied, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "And do you understand that what happens tonight will change you irrevocably? That you may emerge from these trials as something other than what you were?" Elena's eyes found Nikolai's again, drawing strength from the steady warmth of their connection. "I understand, and I accept." Katerina nodded solemnly. "Then let the trials begin." The pack moved as one toward the doors that led into the forest. Elena found herself flanked by Nikolai and Katerina, the rest of the pack forming a protective circle around them as they walked deeper into the woods than she'd ever ventured before. The trees here were ancient, their branches forming a canopy so thick that even full daylight would barely penetrate. Tonight, under the dark moon, the forest was a realm of shadows and whispered sounds that raised the hair on Elena's arms. They walked for what felt like hours, following paths so faint Elena couldn't see them. But something deep inside her could sense the direction they needed to go, as if the forest itself was guiding her steps. When they finally stopped, it was in a clearing dominated by a circle of standing stones that hummed with old magic. "The heart of our territory," Nikolai said quietly. "Every alpha for 10 generations has been crowned here. Every pack member has taken their oath within this circle." Elena stepped toward the stones, feeling power roll off them in waves. Symbols were carved into their surfaces, runes that seemed to shift and dance in her peripheral vision, never quite holding still when she looked directly at them. "The first trial," Katarina announced, "is finding your true self." Before Elena could ask what that meant, the world around her began to change. The clearing faded, replaced by a landscape of pure sensation and instinct. She was running, no, hunting, through forests that felt more real than anything she'd ever experienced. Her senses were impossibly sharp, cataloging scents and sounds with predatory precision. A part of her mind tried to panic, tried to assert that this was impossible, that humans didn't hunt through mystical forests guided by supernatural instincts. But a deeper part, something that had been sleeping until Nikolai's bond awakened it, reveled in the freedom and power. She followed the scent trail through moonlit groves and across crystal streams, her quarry always just ahead. When she finally cornered her target in a dell surrounded by silver birches, she discovered she was hunting herself, or rather, the version of herself that had existed before the bond, before she'd learned there was more to the world than human limitations. The other Elena looked small and tired, worn down by years of struggle and loneliness. "You can go back," the vision said sadly. "Return to your safe, predictable life. Miguel is healed. You've fulfilled your part of the bargain." "But that was never really the bargain, was it?" Elena replied, understanding flooding through her. "This was always about finding where I belong." The vision smiled and dissolved into moonlight, leaving Elena standing alone in the mystical forest. But she wasn't alone. She could feel Nikolai's presence through their bond, steady and warm and utterly devoted. The second trial came without warning. The forest around her erupted into chaos, snarling wolves, the clash of supernatural forces, the scent of blood and fear. Through their bond, she felt Nikolai's pain as he was injured, felt his desperate need for her help. Every instinct screamed at her to run toward him, to abandon the trial and go to his aid. But deeper wisdom whispered that this was the test. Not her willingness to help, but her ability to trust that he would survive while she completed what she'd started. Elena forced herself to remain in the circle, sending strength down their bond instead of rushing to his physical aid. She felt his surprise at her restraint, followed by fierce pride as he realized she was learning to balance love with wisdom. The third trial was the hardest. The magic of the stones reached into her very essence, showing her potential futures. Children with Nikolai's eyes and her determination, growing old together in this mountain sanctuary, but also other possibilities. His death in battle, her own mortality cutting their bond short, the pack scattering without strong leadership. "Power always comes with a price," a voice whispered from the stones themselves. "Are you willing to pay it?" Elena thought of the love flowing between her and Nikolai, of the family she'd found in this unlikely pack, of the woman she was becoming through their acceptance and trust. "Yes," she said simply. The world exploded into light and sensation. Elena felt power rush through her. Not the ability to shift like Nikolai's kind, but something uniquely her own. Enhanced senses that would let her detect supernatural threats, intuitive understanding of pack dynamics and territorial magic, and most importantly, the ability to anchor Nikolai's wolf when the wildness threatened to consume his human mind. When the light faded, she was standing in the stone circle again, but everything had changed. The pack watched her with new respect, and through her bond with Nikolai, she felt his awe at what she'd become. "Welcome to the pack, sister," Katerina said formally, and Elena realized she could sense the older woman's wolf now, could feel the pack's acceptance of her like a warm embrace. Nikolai stepped forward, his eyes blazing with pride and love. "My mate," he said simply, and the words carried weight that transcended human understanding. "My alpha," Elena replied, and knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, not as human and werewolf, but as true partners bound by forces older than time itself. The dark moon watched over them as they sealed their bond with a kiss that tasted of wild magic and forever. Chapter 12. Blood and Promises. Elena woke the morning after her initiation feeling fundamentally changed in ways she was still trying to understand. Her senses were sharper than ever. She could hear Dimitri's conversation with one of the younger pack members 3 floors below, could smell the approaching rain from miles away, could feel the subtle shift in atmospheric pressure that meant a storm was coming. But more than that, she could sense the pack itself. Each member registered in her consciousness like a warm point of light, their emotions and general locations flowing through her awareness as naturally as her own heartbeat. It was overwhelming and comforting all at once. Nikolai was already awake beside her, though he was pretending to sleep. Through their bond, she could feel his amazement at her transformation, his wonder at how completely she'd embraced her new nature. "I know you're awake," she murmured against his shoulder, pressing a kiss to the warm skin there. "How?" he asked, though she could hear the smile in his voice. "I can feel you thinking." Elena propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. Is that normal? Being able to sense everyone's emotions? For an alpha's mate who's undergone the full initiation? Yes, though it usually takes weeks or months to develop. Nikolai's hand came up to trace the line of her cheek. "You're remarkable, Elena. I've never seen anyone adapt to pack consciousness so quickly." Elena nestled closer to him, marveling at how right this felt. Lying in bed with her werewolf husband, discussing supernatural abilities as casually as the weather. "What does it mean exactly? This pack consciousness?" "It means you're connected to all of us now, not just me. You'll be able to sense when pack members are in danger, coordinate group activities, even communicate basic emotions across distances." Nikolai's expression grew serious. "It also means you're bound by pack law now. Our enemies are your enemies. Our obligations are your obligations." Elena felt a chill of premonition. "Speaking of enemies, is there something specific I should know about?" Through their bond, she felt Nikolai's careful consideration of how much to tell her. The sensation was strange, like watching someone rifle through files in their mind, deciding what to share. "There's a situation developing," he said finally. "The Alpine Council has requested a meeting." "The Alpine Council?" "Representatives from the remaining packs in this mountain range. They convene when there are territorial disputes or other issues that affect multiple groups." Elena sat up fully, pulling the sheet around herself. "Issues like an alpha marrying a human?" "Among other things." Nikolai's jaw tightened. "Word of your initiation has spread faster than I expected. Some packs see it as an abomination, others as a sign of weakness. A few are curious enough to want to meet you themselves. And this meeting is happening tomorrow night, here at Raven's Hollow." Elena absorbed this information, her mind racing through implications. "They're coming to judge whether I'm worthy of the bond we share. Partly, they're also coming to assess whether the Volkov pack remains strong enough to hold this territory." Nikolai sat up beside her, his hand finding hers. "Elena, some of these alphas have been looking for an excuse to challenge my leadership for years. Your humanity gives them ammunition. Then I'll prove them wrong." The words came out with surprising steel. Elena felt her pack consciousness flare, sensing the agreement and support flowing from the other members of the household. What do I need to know? Nikolai's smile was fierce with pride. Everything. Pack hierarchies, territorial law, the formal protocols for inter-pack meetings. We have less than 36 hours to prepare you. What followed were the most intensive 36 hours of Elena's life. Katerina schooled her in the intricate etiquette of supernatural politics, which alphas could be addressed directly and which required formal intermediaries, the subtle body language that communicated respect versus submission, the ancient gestures that carried meanings lost to human society. Dmitri taught her to recognize the scent signatures of different pack bloodlines, explaining how werewolf politics often came down to reading between the lines of carefully neutral statements. Anya, to Elena's surprise, spent hours helping her practice the mental shields that would prevent stronger supernatural beings from reading her emotions too clearly. "You're still human," Anya explained as they worked on strengthening Elena's psychic defenses. "That makes you vulnerable to certain types of manipulation. But it also means they won't expect the level of mental discipline you're capable of achieving." Through it all, Elena could feel Nikolai's pride in her rapid learning, but also his deep anxiety about the coming confrontation. More than once, she caught him staring at her with an expression that looked suspiciously like someone memorizing a face he might never see again. "Stop that," she said finally, cornering him in his study as he reviewed territorial maps. "Stop what?" "Looking at me like I'm going to disappear. We're in this together, remember?" Elena moved around the desk to face him directly. "Whatever happens tomorrow night, we face it as a team." Nikolai pulled her down onto his lap, his arms encircling her waist. "Some of these alphas are old, Elena. Old and powerful and set in their ways. They've never seen a human survive the full initiation, let alone thrive afterward. Then it's about time they learned something new." Elena cupped his face in her hands, feeling his wolf's restlessness through their bond. "You saved my brother's life by taking a risk on me. Let me return the favor by proving that risk was worth it." The evening of the council meeting, representatives from 6 different packs arrived at Raven's Hollow. Elena watched from her window as they emerged from expensive cars and private helicopters, each group moving with the coordinated precision of apex predators. They were all beautiful in that sharp-edged way of supernatural beings, but their beauty was cold, calculated. These were creatures who'd survived centuries by being ruthless, and Elena could sense their skepticism and barely contained hostility even from 3 stories up. "They look friendly," she said dryly as Nikolai joined her at the window. "The Alpine Council hasn't had a meeting end without bloodshed in over 50 years, he replied grimly. "Tonight won't be about friendly." Elena studied the assembled alphas, noting the way they segregated themselves by pack, the careful distances they maintained, the weapons she could glimpse beneath expensive clothing. What exactly are the rules for these meetings? Formal challenge combat is forbidden on neutral territory, but that's about the only restriction. Nikolai's hand settled on the small of her back, warm and steadying. "Elena, if things go badly..." "They won't." Elena turned to face him, letting him see the determination in her eyes. "I'm not the same desperate woman who signed that contract 3 weeks ago. I'm your mate, a member of this pack, and I've been initiated under the Dark Moon. They can question my humanity, but they can't question my commitment." Through their bond, she felt Nikolai's love for her burn bright as a star, followed by something that felt like awe. "You're going to change everything," he said quietly. "Not just for us, but for all of our kind." Elena smiled, feeling the truth of those words settle into her bones. "Good. It's about time someone did." Outside, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, and Elena knew that whatever happened in the way, Hours ahead would determine not just her future with Nikolai, but the future of human-werewolf relations for generations to come. She was ready for that responsibility. More than ready, she was eager to prove that love could indeed transcend species, and that sometimes the strongest bonds were forged in the most unlikely circumstances. The Alpine Council was about to learn what it meant to underestimate Elena Vasquez-Volkov. Chapter 13. The Alpha's Heart. The Great Hall of Raven's Hollow had been transformed for the Alpine Council meeting. Ancient banners bearing the symbols of each pack hung from the vaulted ceiling, while a massive oak table dominated the center of the room. Elena entered beside Nikolai, her head high and her senses sharp with supernatural awareness. The 6 visiting alphas rose as they approached, a gesture of formal respect that Elena hadn't expected. Through her enhanced perception, she could read the complex web of emotions in the room. Curiosity, skepticism, barely contained hostility, and from 1 or 2, something that might have been hope. "Brothers and sisters," Nikolai said formally, his voice carrying the authority of centuries of leadership. "I present my mate, Elena Vasquez-Volkov, initiated under the Dark Moon and accepted into the Volkov pack with full honors." A woman with silver hair and ice-blue eyes stepped forward. Alpha Morgana of the Shadowmere pack, if Elena's crash course in pack politics served her correctly. So, this is the human who thinks herself worthy of an alpha's bond. "I am the human who is worthy," Elena replied evenly, meeting the other woman's gaze without flinching. "Unless you're here to dispute the validity of ceremonies that predate your own pack's founding?" Surprised laughter rippled through the room. Alpha Morgana's eyebrows rose, and Elena caught a flash of what might have been approval in her expression. "Clever," said a dark-haired man Elena recognized as Marcus Blackmore. Apparently his defeat hadn't prevented him from attending the council. But cleverness isn't strength. How do we know she won't break under pressure? How do we know the bond won't make Volkov weak when he's needed to be strong? "Perhaps," Elena said quietly, "you should ask the scouts who reported on the recent territorial dispute. I believe they mentioned that the Volkov Alpha fought with unusual focus and coordination. Through their bond, she felt Nikolai's surprise and pride. She hadn't told him she'd been feeding him tactical awareness during the fight, helping him coordinate the pack's movements through their connection. "You influenced the battle?" Another alpha, this one with russet hair and amber eyes, leaned forward with interest. "How?" "The same way any pack member influences group dynamics," Elena replied. "Through shared consciousness and mutual support. The bond doesn't make an alpha weak. It gives him access to additional perspective and strength." "Perspective, perhaps," Morgana said coolly. "But what happens when that perspective becomes a liability? What happens when protecting you compromises his ability to lead?" Elena felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. This was the crux of their objection, not her humanity per se, but the vulnerability they believed it created. "Then perhaps," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence, "you should test that theory directly." The words surprised even her, but she felt their rightness through her pack consciousness. Sometimes the only way to prove strength was to demonstrate it. "Elena," Nikolai warned through their bond, but she could also feel his understanding of what she was doing. "Are you challenging the council?" Marcus Blackmore's voice was dangerously soft. "I'm offering to prove that a bonded alpha isn't weakened by his mate's humanity." Elena stepped away from Nikolai's protective presence, moving to the center of the room. "Choose your test. Physical combat, mental challenges, whatever you think will prove your point. But when I succeed, this question is settled for all packs, for all time." The alphas exchanged glances, their supernatural senses no doubt picking up nuances of communication Elena couldn't follow. Finally, Morgana nodded slowly, Very well. But not physical combat. That would prove nothing except that you've been trained well. The silver-haired alpha's smile was sharp as winter frost. We'll test the bond itself. Your ability to anchor your mate when his wolf threatens to overwhelm his human mind. Elena felt ice form in her stomach. What does that involve? A hunt, said the russet-haired alpha. The most primal expression of wolf nature. We'll create a scenario designed to drive Nikolai's wolf into a frenzy, to make him lose control completely. If you can bring him back from that edge, if you can prove the bond stabilizes rather than distracts him, then we'll acknowledge your place among us. And if I can't? Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. Then the bond will be severed, by force if necessary, and you'll be exiled from supernatural society forever. Elena felt Nikolai's horror and fury through their connection, felt his desperate desire to refuse the challenge on her behalf. But she also felt something else, his absolute faith in her ability to succeed. I accept, she said firmly. What followed was unlike anything Elena could have imagined. The alphas used their combined power to create a supernatural hunting ground in the forest surrounding Raven's Hollow. A space where primal instincts were amplified tenfold, where the civilized mind struggled to maintain control over ancient drives. Elena watched from the tree line as Nikolai shifted, his transformation more violent than she'd ever seen it. His wolf was magnificent and terrifying, muscles rippling with power that could tear a human apart without effort. But it was the wildness in his golden eyes that made her heart race. This wasn't the controlled predator she knew, but something far more dangerous. The test began immediately. Phantom prey flickered through the supernatural hunting ground, creatures designed to trigger every hunting instinct Nikolai possessed. Elena felt his human mind fragment under the assault of pure predatory drive, felt his wolf surge toward complete dominance. This was the moment. The test of whether their bond was strength or weakness. Elena closed her eyes and reached for their connection, not with her mind, but with her heart. She sent him not thoughts or commands, but pure emotion. Her love for him, her absolute trust in his strength, her unshakable certainty that he was more than just wolf or just human. He was both, and that made him extraordinary. She felt him receive her message, felt his surprise as her human perspective began to anchor his fragmenting consciousness. Slowly, carefully, she helped him find the balance between wolf and man, showing him through their bond how to be both without losing either. When Nikolai finally stood before the council in human form again, his eyes were clear and entirely his own. The hunting ground faded around them, leaving only the forest and the amazed silence of 6 alpha werewolves. Impossible, Marcus Blackmore breathed. I've never seen anyone pull back from a frenzy that complete. The bond, Morgana said wonderingly. It didn't weaken him. It gave him access to human rational thought while maintaining wolf strength. Elena swayed on her feet, exhausted by the effort of anchoring Nikolai across such a massive psychic disruption. Immediately, he was there, his arms strong around her waist, his love and gratitude flowing through their connection like warm honey. The question is settled, Morgana announced formally. The Volkov pack retains its territory and status. Elena Vasquez Volkov is recognized as a legitimate alpha's mate with all rights and protections thereof. Elena looked around the circle of faces, seeing respect where there had been skepticism, curiosity where there had been hostility. She'd done it. She'd proven that love could indeed transcend species, that the bond between human and werewolf could be a source of strength rather than weakness. Welcome to the supernatural community, Morgana said with something that might have been a smile. Try not to revolutionize too many traditions at once. Elena laughed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. No promises. 3 months later, Elena stood on the balcony of their bedroom, watching Miguel play with a litter of wolf puppies in the garden below. Her brother had made a full recovery and decided to spend his summer break at Raven's Hollow, ostensibly to recuperate, but really because he'd fallen in love with the mountains and the pack's way of life. "He's thinking about applying to veterinary school here instead of in the city," Nikolai said, joining her at the railing. "Dimitri's been teaching him about supernatural animal medicine." "Of course he has," Elena replied, leaning back against her husband's warmth. Miguel never could resist a challenge. Through the pack bond, she could feel the contentment of her chosen family, Katerina tending her herb gardens, Anya training the younger wolves in combat techniques, Dimitri working on security improvements that would protect them all. It was a good life, a full life, everything she'd never known she wanted. "Any regrets?" Nikolai asked, his arms encircling her waist. Elena considered the question seriously. Her old life seemed like a distant dream now. The cramped apartment, the endless worry about money, the bone-deep loneliness that had followed her everywhere. Here, she had purpose, family, and a love that transcended every boundary she'd thought immutable. "Only one," she said finally. Nikolai tensed slightly. "What's that?" Elena turned in his arms, smiling at the concern in his storm-gray eyes. "I regret that it took a crisis to bring me to you. I wish I'd found my way here sooner." His kiss was soft and thorough, tasting of forever and wild places and coming home. When they broke apart, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you, Elena Volkov," he said simply. "I love you too," she replied. "My alpha, my mate, my heart." Outside their window, wolves howled in the distance, calling to each other across the mountains. Elena felt the sound resonate in her bones, felt her pack consciousness expand to include every creature in their territory. She was exactly where she belonged, exactly who she was meant to be. The girl who'd signed a desperate contract to save her brother was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd chosen love over fear, who'd embraced the impossible and made it her own. Elena Vasquez Volkov, Alpha's mate and bridge between two worlds, was finally, completely home.